On the night of June 9th, 2015, an overpowering stench permeated the entire street. Neighbors hurriedly covered their noses and mouths, desperately trying to pinpoint the source of the foul odor. It didn't take long for them to realize that the nauseating smell was emanating from Yulia's house. Yulia, a 47-year-old woman, resided there with her two daughters, Valeria, age 12, and Anastasia, age 19. Soon after, a concerned citizen contacted the state police, alerting them to the putrid smell. Without wasting any time, the police swiftly made their way to the scene. As the officers stepped inside the house, they were met with a horrifying discovery. What's up, Darklings? Welcome to Raven Bell. Today we're diving into a twisted tale that will send chills down your spine. The story begins in the border city of Tijuana, where a seemingly ordinary family was harboring a horrific secret. What started as a domestic dispute spiraled into an unimaginable nightmare of violence and depravity. Brace yourselves, for the details of this case are not for the faint of heart, but for those of you who dare to explore the darkest depths of human psyche. Let's peel back the layers of this macabre mystery together. Grab your crypts close and join me as we unravel the shocking truth behind the Butcher of Tijuana. 47-year-old Yulia Mazny was born in Siberia and Igor Leshenko in Ukraine. They met at a young age in Russia while working as gymnasts and acrobats in a famous Russian circus. The young couple soon fell in love and decided to venture out in 1995. They crossed the world and settled in Mexico. At first, they lived in San Luis Potosi, where their first daughter, Anastasia Leshenko, was born in 1996. After some time, the two immigrants managed to become naturalized in Mexico. With the skills they possessed, they tried their luck as independent dancers. They were so good that they managed to participate in a Mexican television program called New Day. They traveled through Mexico City, where they ended up settling for some time. Years later, the family moved to Tijuana, the largest city in the Mexican state called Baja California. In the late 90s, Igor started training gymnasts at the High Performance Center. He also began preparing Olympic fencing athletes. Yulia loved dancing as she always remembered her good years in the Russian circus. But she also dedicated herself to teaching the Russian language at school. In 2003, Yulia and Igor had their second daughter, Valeria, who was born with multiple disabilities. The doctors even said that the girl would not develop speech and that she would most likely not be able to walk either. The following years were very difficult for the couple as Valeria needed a lot of attention and many visits to different specialists. Yulia focused all her attention and time on Valeria, which ended up distancing Anastasia and her husband. The relationship between the couple deteriorated, and they decided to separate. Anastasia, the eldest daughter, decided to stay with her mother. However, her parents' disunity and her mother's overprotectiveness towards her younger sister that she deserved irritated her more than everyone thought. Anastasia's childhood was very ordinary. She went to school, had fun like any other girl her age, liked listening to music, and sometimes complained about having to clean her room. As the years went by and Anastasia grew up, her relationship with her mother became more difficult. The teenager became rebellious and her mood changed frequently. Although she was almost always in a bad mood, the fights between mother and daughter became more constant. In 2010, the teenager entered high school, and at 14 years old, Anastasia tried drugs for the first time. She started with marijuana and then moved on to methamphetamine. The girl felt alone, excluded by her parents, and found refuge in the use of such substances in the company of some schoolmates. She started looking for work through Facebook, mentioning that she knew how to speak English, Spanish, and Russian. But when she couldn't find anything, she felt frustrated. But the addiction soon attracted her parents' attention. They realized that she was consuming drugs, so they tried to take her away from that dark environment and admitted her to a rehabilitation center. But it was only for a short time because Anastasia insisted on continuing to live on the edge of the abyss. On February 9, 2015, Anastasia left home without warning her parents. For this reason, her mother, Iulia, registered a report of her disappearance. The Support Center for Missing and Absent Persons issued a national alert to find Anastasia, and the judicial authorities created posters with her information. But it was only on the 27th of the same month that Anastasia contacted her mother on the phone to let her know that she was in Culiac and Sinaloa with some friends. She also mentioned that she had gotten a job and had nothing to worry about. In fact, Anastasia had lied to her mother because she didn't work and lived with other young people who used drugs daily. The girl was more than addicted to that hell. A few months later, Anastasia returned home with her mother and younger sister. But the fights and problems between them did not end because the teenager's resentment towards them burned in her chest. Many times the girl was seen acting strangely, even on social media. She even posted disturbing photos of a woman with a rope around her neck swallowing pills. A person on social media even questioned the reason for such a post, to which Anastasia responded, "Because I'm not sane." Little by little, she began to leave signs of her behavior. She seemed restless and desperate. It is even stated that she started to keep cigarette butts in her room, which she put in a coffee pot. In addition to always being seen under the influence of drugs. But all this behavior would have an explanation. A terrifying case that no one had ever imagined was about to happen. Days before the discovery, a neighbor mentioned that he heard Anastasia arguing with her mother, saying, "Are you fed up with me? I'm going to kill you." Around 9 o'clock at night, neighbors heard moans and screams. However, they didn't pay much attention because this was a constant occurrence, and they often couldn't understand what these were saying since those were speaking in Russian. After a fight, Anastasia went for a walk on the beach. She smoked several cigarettes, sat on the sand, and cried for several minutes. She couldn't help but reminisce about the pleasant moments she had spent with her parents in that place, enjoying the sea. But now, all of that seemed so distant and strange to her that she fell asleep. The next day, Sunday, June 7th, 2015, when Anastasia woke up, she went home. She was very angry, and her expression on her face couldn't hide what she felt. The young woman entered her house and, in the backyard, found a rope in an armchair. Her mother, Yulia, aged 47, was watching television. Anastasia, aged 19, stood behind her and wrapped a rope around her neck. She placed her knee on the back of the armchair and began to strangle her with all her strength. Yulia writhed and tried to fight back but was gradually overpowered. Anastasia eventually reduced her strength and loosened the rope. She saw her mother's face filled with terror and suffering. This insane attack lasted more than 25 minutes until Yulia stopped moving and breathing. Then, Anastasia went to her younger sister Valeria's room. Valeria, 12 years old, was lying defenseless on her bed. But the young girl didn't care and started strangling her sister with the same rope. Valeria was even more vulnerable, not only because she was small, but also because she couldn't speak or scream due to her multiple disabilities. She couldn't ask for help. When Valeria stopped shaking, Anastasia put her ear to the girl's chest and made sure that her heart was no longer beating. Then she took her pack of cigarettes, left the house, and went back to the beach. It was around 9:20 p.m. on Sunday. It was very hot, but few people were walking on the street. Her heart was beating hard because of the adrenaline rush. She ran to the beach for several minutes until she couldn't take it anymore and collapsed on the sand. She lit a cigarette and watched the stars for many minutes. After approximately 2 hours, Anastasia returned home. But on the way, she stopped at a pharmacy and bought a box of 10 black plastic bags measuring 70 by 90 centimeters, Upon arriving home, she went straight to the kitchen where she selected 3 knives of different sizes and edges. She then dragged the bodies of the 2 victims to the same place. The young woman began to remove their hearts, then their heads and Valeria's eyes, which she threw down the toilet. Anastasia had been experiencing pain all over her body at night and headaches that prevented her from sleeping. She was convinced that these symptoms were because her mother and sister were practicing witchcraft against her, wanting to end her life little by little. She took the knives and patiently dismembered her mother's body, then did the same with her sister's body. She placed the limbs in the newly purchased plastic bags. She made sure to clean the blood stains on the floor, walls, sink, and knives. This work lasted all night, and when it was finished, it was already after 7 a.m. the next day. But there was one detail that Anastasia had not resolved: how to get rid of the bodies. She spent hours and hours thinking about what she would do with them, but she couldn't decide. She used drugs to try to escape from it, but when the drugs ran out, the situation became tormenting for her. Eventually, she couldn't take it anymore and left the house without resolving the issue. At that point, 2 days had passed, and the bodies were left in a state of decomposition. It was the smell that alerted the neighbors, who then notified the police. Upon arriving at the scene, the police made a terrible discovery. The bodies of 2 people were divided into 3 black plastic bags. Flies and worms had proliferated, and the putrid smell was unbearable. The experts collected evidence to start the investigations and began the search for Anastasia, the eldest daughter, and Igor Leshchenko, the husband and father of the victim. The neighbors were surprised to see how the bodies of their neighbors were removed. The police informed them that it was an adult and a girl. There was not the slightest doubt. They knew immediately who Yulia and Valeria were. On Thursday, June 11th, the police officers discovered the whereabouts of Anastasia, who was at the house of a friend to whom she had confessed everything. It was the friend herself who made an anonymous call to the police, also reporting 2 bodies bagged in a house, also the whereabouts of the alleged perpetrator in the Jardin du Mar neighborhood, less than a mile, almost 1 kilometer from the U.S. border. After being arrested, Anastasia told the public prosecutor's office that she murdered her mother and sister because they wanted to kill her using sorcery. She argued that she researched on the internet how to get rid of witches and discovered that witches had to have their hearts removed and their limbs cut off to nullify their spells. In addition to the fact that a horrible voice in her mind told her to get rid of them, Igor, on the other hand, told the public prosecutor's office that he had not lived with his wife and daughters for some time, but that he saw them frequently. However, he recognized that Anastasia's character had changed a lot in recent years as she became very aggressive and was in a bad mood almost all the time. The young woman was subjected to several interrogations, first by investigators from the Attorney General's office, then by the homicide unit, and finally by staff from the Russian consulate. Despite Anastasia's confession, the public prosecutor's office indicated that there was not enough evidence to keep her detained, so she was released. This caused society's indignation and consternation. The citizens could not understand how a confessed murderer could remain free. However, when the criminal judge responsible for Anastasia's release was questioned about the matter, she replied, "I don't run away from my responsibility. I do my job." The public prosecutor's office handed me an incomplete investigation process, and there were missing ministerial opinions that were not complied with. Therefore, there were not enough elements to arrest Anastasia only on June 19th. The arrest warrant was issued against the accused. That same day, she was arrested while walking with some friends in a park. And on Friday, June 26th, Anastasia was transferred to the La Mesa prison in Tijuana, where she was prosecuted for the crime of aggravated homicide due to ties and relationship with the victim. 3 days later, Anastasia was interviewed in prison by a journalist. She mentioned details and data that she had not said before, which left the police even more disconcerted. Her case spread all over the world, and the young woman got straight to the point. Anastasia said, "The problem is that I pleaded guilty. The truth is that I had been using drugs for several days, so when they arrested me, the police told me that if I pleaded guilty, they would release me that day. Some hooded men slapped me several times. I got scared and then said that I had murdered my mother and sister while they were filming me with a camera and their cell phones." Then Anastasia narrated what happened that day. On the fateful day, she arrived home, but it was locked. Then she remembered that they had keys hidden in the washing machine, and she went to get them. When she entered the house, it was upside down. There were a lot of clothes piled on the sofa, and her room was a disaster, so she decided to tidy up the house and started sweeping the patio. Suddenly, she realized that a strange and unpleasant smell was coming from the back hallway. When she got closer, there was a black bag. She opened it, and there were her mother's remains. She didn't know how to say that, but it was horrible. Her mother's head was there. She called a friend and took her to the house to show her the bags, but she didn't want to look. Anastasia told her that she hadn't done that. She asked her friend what they should do, and she told her to tell the police. Then they went to her friend's house. Hours later, the police came to her. They put her in a car, and there they slapped her and told her all the time that it would be better for her to plead guilty, and only then would they release her. They took her to some offices or something similar, and there more than 4 employees abused her. She was so drugged that she thought they had arrested her, so she didn't remember what had happened to her mother and her sister, and she didn't care. The problem is that I confessed to something that I didn't do, and that's why I'm in this situation. I couldn't say goodbye to them or hug my father. I only remember that they told me that you dismembered them, and that was the first thing I said, and they made up the rest. I'm very frustrated because I don't remember many things, and everything has been like a terrible nightmare. Until recently, I started to vent, crying a lot, but I distract myself by watching television or reading. Anastasia may or may not be guilty of the crimes of which she was accused. The truth is that the expert evidence revealed traces of a genetic profile that belongs to an unknown man, that is, traces of DNA from a man unrelated to the Leshchenko family on the knives and plastic bags used by the killer. Anastasia's lawyer mentioned that her mother, Yulia, had several suitors and raised the hypothesis that perhaps one of them had a disagreement with Yulia and murdered her. But he also believed that the Attorney General's office did not want to interrogate him despite having identified him in relation to the sexual abuse that Anastasia was allegedly a victim of. The police also had some evidence, as the doctor from the public prosecutor's office where she was taken the night she was detained recorded the aforementioned attacks in writing. Furthermore, the defense lawyer mentioned that it was not possible that Anastasia, who weighed only 53 kg, had the strength to drag and dismember the bodies of her mother and sister, much less that only kitchen knives had been used for such an action. There is no feasibility of almost surgical cuts with kitchen knives. They did not bother to look for real evidence. Many things were left unfinished, and the case of Anastasia Leshchenko, who the media nicknamed the Butcher of Tijuana, continues to give something to talk about due to the strange nature that surrounds it. Only the killer and the 2 victims know for sure what happened, but one thing is certain: in 2015, Anastasia was found guilty of the charges and sentenced to 80 years in prison. And there you have it, Darklings, the disturbing case of Anastasia Leshchenko, the Butcher of Tijuana. While her guilt seems likely given the horrific nature of the crimes, her later retraction casts some doubt that was never fully investigated. Mostly people believed that Anastasia was likely the perpetrator acting in a delusional, unstable state brought on by drug abuse. However, The mishandled investigation leaves unanswered questions. Regardless of the specifics, this case will go down as an unfathomable family tragedy. Sleep uneasily, my fellow crypt keepers, for the darkness is never fully buried.